2 roommates survived the stabbing attack inside this house last November that left 4 other students dead.
Warning, you don't expect to find your roommate stabbed to death or 4 of your roommates stabbed to death, especially since you slept through the night and you didn't hear anything.
I think there is something fishy with those 2 survivors.
On today's episode, we're peeking beyond the narrative into the layers of a story that barely whispered through the headlines. That co-defendant that was mentioned by defense and allegedly later debunked. But what was missed was the prosecution's response indicating that it wouldn't be debunked so fast. Split-second pieces of evidence we're going to discuss, and it's probably going to ruffle some feathers, because there's a world of a shielded narrative within this crime. And we're going back to the question of those household rivalries, where many believe suspects lurk, and others think you're scum of the earth for even mentioning, as they're heavily implicated and entwined in accusations and suspicions of domestic violence within the house. Stay tuned, buckle up, we're going to connect the dots in this intricate mystery. Discuss the implications of victim shielding, survival, and possible roommates as a rival. Be advised that the following content contains true crime material that may be disturbing to some viewers. It includes discussions of criminal acts, potentially graphic descriptions, and mature themes. It may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. The defendant's first request for discovery. Now comes the twist. The defendant's attorney making that request, totally normal legal step in the proceeding, and it hits the headlines that a co-defendant has been indicated through those requests, and a mere flicker of energy gets spent before everyone blew it off. It's like a plot twist in the movie that the audience misses because they're too focused on the main character, i.e. Bryan Kohberger. So sure, while it could be considered boilerplate that it's been asked for on the first request for discovery in a defendant's case, it's certainly not boilerplate to write back, indicating that such co-defendant information exists in Exhibit A. And I don't like to just tell you guys, I like to be able to show you, and what better case to be able to show you with than the same case we're discussing. Prosecution had been crying and whining for the alibi discovery from Ann Taylor for quite a while, and eventually she does respond to that request, and we can see a great example of a response which has 0 ambiguity. In response to the prosecuting attorneys wanting to know about books, papers, documents which Kohberger would use for his defense, his attorneys wrote back, "There are no books or papers or documents or photographs or copies or portions thereof in the possession of the defendant at this time." On request 2, which was for reports of mental examinations and scientific tests, the defense attorneys replied, "There are no reports of physical or mental examination or scientific tests." And there you have it, folks. He could have easily said there are no co-defendants. Same can be said for the informant information, which everyone blew off. Again, we had it highlighted for just a flicker of time in the mainstream media, and allegedly that gets debunked. Other than here on my channel, I haven't really seen anyone discussing the fact that prosecuting attorneys then again not only respond back indicating that there is such a thing, nodding to Exhibit A, but also pray the court to provide relief from actually making these items about and pertaining to the informant, providing a protective order so that those items don't have to be disclosed. And that, my friend, is my production of everyone dismiss the damn co-defendant and informant way too easily, because those are not responses similar to someone who doesn't have evidence. There is no thing. There is no blank. There is no bloop. We won't be turning this over at trial. Bong-de-dong. We get see Exhibit A. Under these rules, we don't have to disclose this to you, and we pray the court provide us protective orders against having to disclose this to you. That doesn't sound like no co-defendant, no informant. According to the investigator hired by the defense, Bethany Funk was interviewed by police on several occasions. She disclosed things she heard and things that she saw. Now, these things that she disclosed so far has been sealed from the public. But interestingly, defense attorneys for Bryan Kohberger have an ex parte hearing where they ask the judge, without the word of prosecuting attorneys and without any hearing, to subpoena and secure a witness that was residing out of the state of Idaho at the time. A little bit more about that victim shielding. Every time that people are faced with these issues surrounding the testimony that was put into the probable cause affidavit for for the defendant's arrest, as well as many instances that arise pertaining to the delayed reporting of the crime and anything surrounding the so-called two survivors of the resident where the massacre occurred. Always seems to be some mainstream narrative type of excuse lended to them, and in this case, as far as I know, the main excuse that I see for this is that Bethany does not actually have exculpatory evidence, and that defense is just implying this because that is a part of the requirements in order to secure that witness. However, if you read the investigator's memorandum in support of that subpoena, you will see that they don't just indicate that Bethany may have exculpatory evidence or that they think she has. They implicitly state that she, without a doubt, has information that is exculpatory to the defendant. Portions of information Ms. Funk has is exculpatory to the defendant, quote unquote. We know that there was never a size given for that print mentioned in the PCA, and that, lo and behold, Bethany, as well as one of the drinking incident suspects outside of the murder scene and near to the relevant time of the murders, have Converse. So Bethany has Converse, that kid had on Converse from outside of the drinking incident. And yes, that is Bethany. Before someone says it, Bethany is wearing the same shorts that she has on earlier in the day, and where she's pictured with all of the girls, one of the most famous pictures of Bethany, as well as Dylan was still wearing her same dress during the same police incident where this picture of Bethany came from. Long story short, it's Bethany, not the other girl. Not even going to say her name. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are odd about Dylan's testimony or Dylan's statements that were included in the PCA. For one thing, the PCA seems to have a 4 o'clock jam where everybody jams up at 4 o'clock. The DoorDash is dropping off food at that time. They allegedly have the perpetrator outside about to break in at that time. Someone claims to know that everyone was in their rooms by that time, as is mentioned in the PCA. And also, Dylan states that she was awakened by the first noise, for which but I'd ask if she were asleep at 4 o'clock, how they knew everyone was in their rooms by 4 o'clock. We also have the fact that she IDs the killer. She supposedly IDs a masked killer. Allegedly, she sees him on his way out the sliding glass door and toward the exit of the house. But if you look at the stairs, if we're imagining that he came down from the stairs, or even that he came out of the other two victims' bedrooms, Xana's bedroom, it's hard to imagine how she would have peeked out of the door without the suspect seeing her. So apparently she would have had the door completely wide open to see him here. And we can assume that he would have seen her as well, which brings up a lot of questions for a lot of people. Despite the sheer statistics that would indicate that it was probably another student who committed the crime, we're not allowed to talk about it being anything other than a party house. It can't be a drug house or a dope den, even though, yet again, there are actually some studies suggesting over 90% of crime on or near campus are alcohol or drug-induced or related. But again, that's another thing we're not allowed to contemplate. Not in a public forum anyway, not unless you want your comment deleted or everyone to piss and moan and groan about it. And it's totally fine for people to disagree, but it's like no one cares to have a constructive conversation about their disagreements in this crime. It's so head-scratching and annoying. So getting back to those things that we can't constructively discuss, we would talk about why Dylan heard things that made her lock her bedroom door, but not necessarily call the police. Well, I suppose everyone's excuse for this is, maybe she heard something, but it wasn't something so scary. But then wait, she saw the masked suspect, so she sees a guy in a mask and thinks that's normal? Okay, I get it, COVID. But COVID was almost practically over at this time, and even before that, I highly doubt that a lot of these younger college students were running around on the inside of the house with their freaking COVID mask on, but okay. Anyway, it's speculation time. Let's jump purely into the theoretical here. What we've been told about this incident wouldn't necessarily preclude Dylan from being a co-defendant. She suspects at first it was Kaylee that she heard, and she thinks that she's playing with her dog upstairs. A short time later, she said she heard who she thought was Kaylee again saying something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Now, can she not be a co-defendant while all this is going on? Of course she can. Chilling in her room, listening to them kind of panic that somebody's there. You don't exactly say there's someone here where the roommates can hear you if you're not kind of like, who the hell is this? Alright, so DM stated that she looked out of her bedroom and she didn't see anything. She heard a comment about someone being in the house. So it seems to indicate that she's simultaneously looking out of her window during this point. It does make me suspect and wonder each time that lately the Goncalves in their pleas to keep the house up, as well as during some of their recent interviews, have brought up the suspect sitting outside and waiting and what his view through particular windows would be. So DM stated that she opened her door a second time and she heard what she thought was crying coming from Kernodle's room. She indicates that she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." She also opens up for a third time after she heard the crying, and that's when she sees this figure clad in black and a mask, and she's described him as 5'10", not very muscular but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. And this is where the famous frozen shock face comes in. So she indicates that she's bumped into him somehow. Obviously, her door must have been wide open to have seen him face to face. And a frozen shock phase indicates, wow, she's kind of shocked she's seeing him there. Now, this is the only one that would kind of be able to be seen as outside of the immediate effects of what we would think a co-defendant's testimony would be written as. However, a frozen shock face could also be described as a co-defendant that was playing lookout and or accessory to the crime, being shocked that it had actually happened, watching their accomplice, the perps, plural, leaving the home. And then we have that weird little last part where it says DM did not state that she recognized the male. Well, that was one part that gave me pause for hesitation whenever I was theorizing this particular scenario, and whether all of her statements from PCA align with her being a lookout and or accessory to the crime. And I would still kind of say that this one goes there, right? I mean, if we are theorizing the nature of her being an accessory to the perpetrator or perpetrators, why would she mention to the police that she recognized them? Of course she would pretend it was someone she didn't know, right? Or she wouldn't be like, I saw someone in a mask. She'd be like, I saw Gary. Gary had a knife. It's not funny, sorry. But it just kind of goes without saying, right? So I don't really think that this is something that doesn't align with that theory either. So you might be wondering, why would we know about this co-defendant? Why would they be hidden? Well, it's like keeping the actor that plays a character's role hidden to add suspense. But in legal cases, it's sometimes strategic. Revealing information about a co-defendant could compromise certain efforts that law enforcement has made with that defendant in order to not only sometimes capture what they consider to be the main assailant. And it's sad, but it's so true that sometimes criminals would practically get away with a lot of their crimes were it not for an informant or a co-defendant rolling on their fellow defendants for their joint crime. Now, their statements or actions can obviously change the entire landscape of a case. It's that moment where a second character could become the key to better understanding a plot. Prosecuting attorneys might need their testimony to corroborate and or contradict the defendant's story, the defense team's narrative, or help them with the complexity of evidence that's not so straightforward pertaining to the conviction of said perpetrator or perpetrators. Through this lens, does it make some of DM's detailed observations and actions or inactions make a lot more sense than they did before? Because I'm thinking it might. In a hypothetical scenario where she's aiding the perpetrator, her exact testimony could be implied or interpreted as her monitoring the situation and being a coordinator with the intruder but from the inside, otherwise known as an inside job. She damn near interacts with him in the narrative, encountering a figure clothed in black and a mask. In this scenario where she's complicit, this could be staged, or the one moment she actually saw her co-defendant, knew the crimes had taken place, and commenced her frozen shock phase. It could be written without the rest of the narrative around DM to avoid suspicion, keep her safe, and keep her tucked away as ammo for the prosecution. If DM was aiding the killer, then her account of hearing crying and a male voice saying, "It's okay, I'm gonna help you," well, that makes more sense. The fact that she didn't act, the fact that she didn't report, the fact that she was right on the suspect's path to travel, the fact that her bedroom door's placement seems to indicate that he would have had to have seen her, the shoe prints right there near her door. Did she guide or allow the intruder to navigate the house? So I think in the context that they are exactly as they are now, DM's statements could be seen as an attempt to direct the investigation in a certain way, and the way that they're written could be framed in the narrative to conceal her involvement. But they certainly don't remove her from suspicion of involvement, and some of them even seem to indicate suspicious behavior. So could all of those questions that we had, why the 4 o'clock jam up, if the door's position's allowed to fully open it and let DM have a direct view of the suspect descending the stairs, then even coming from the other suspect's room doesn't really make sense without him noticing her. It could all just be stupid parts of the puzzles, which we didn't put together, which is the obvious answer that he did notice her, but that he let her live. Now, there have been reports of an alleged leak from a grand jury member who claims that DM and BF, Bethany Funk, and Dylan Mortensen were texting one another during the entire massacre. Of course, this is unconfirmed information and can probably be chopped up to fodder. But either way, it's always seemed like the victim's family seemed interested in hearing what these suspects and survivors alike have to say about the incident, and they wanted to come sooner than later, of course. Did I mention that everyone has an excuse for everything? Because everyone was wondering why exactly the police had stated that someone from the victim's phone called 911, reporting that there was an unconscious person. Well, everyone presumed that the report must just be a Whitcomb way of saying, just send someone out there without actually having specific details, but that's actually not true, because eventually, in one of the NPD updates and on the city's website, they give a more detailed account of this eventually and state implicitly it was one of the second floor roommates which was not waking up. Now, it does say that neighbors were summoned, not called, so who knows if there was like screaming or did they run outside before calling? Who knows? But I would like to raise the question why it wasn't one of the two that called police, and was it a way to detach themselves from the actual discovery of the crime and possible suspicions thereof? All right, and some people may ask, pertaining to this speculative narrative, why would that be someone's decision? Why would you choose to remain on the scene rather than creating an external alibi? And I don't think that people understand that external alibis are much larger on the strategy scale, and they're harder to manipulate. And also, it hinges on one's ability to be able to convincingly portray innocence while potentially harboring incriminating knowledge or involvement. So, in this theoretical construct, merely for discussion purposes, the assertion of a clear-cut alibi and feigning such a thing would require like airplane tickets or bus tickets, being out of town with a lot of corroborating witnesses. You would need a lot of corroborating evidence and some completely convincing documents and surveillance that are actually hard to get and quite rare, way more rare than people realize in criminal trials. Typically, people don't have clear-cut alibis. It's almost extinct. It's definitely endangered. An alibi animal rarely sighted. So let's say that there's another way to divert suspicion from oneself, because there could be a beneficial element to the narrative that she was there. This would allow a perpetrator or a suspect of a crime to not only feign innocence, but also assume the position of victim and to be victim shielded. Did one of the survivors of the tragic incident feign unconsciousness? Because this could serve multiple purposes too. To be portrayed as another victim, as well as eliciting immediate sympathy and medical needs that divert the focus from her involvement and which skew her contact with authorities on first impression. So the call frames the situation as a health crisis rather than a criminal scene initially, possibly buying the person who feigned the fainting some time to solidify their version of events. So when emergency services arrive, they find this feigning unconscious state, and this could shift into immediate concern for their well-being. And as long as the person could express convincing confusion or shock, it would just be attributed to the traumatic event, and maybe she'd be babied accordingly. Maybe the sweet approach to investigating her could account for the night's events and a possibly carefully constructed story which aligns with observable facts that investigators needed to prove, while also maintaining the public view of her innocence. Of course, this theoretical scenario involves a high level of manipulation, but it wouldn't be anything that suspects or criminals have tried to get away with before.
I think his motive, which is weird, I think his motive was he wanted to do it. He wanted to murder.
Yeah. Well, he did want to be
that's, but why did he want to murder? Well, he wanted murder because he wanted to see what it felt like, because he's a weirdo. I don't know,
Well, he wanted to be a police officer, and he probably...
Well, I don't think most police officers want to murder people.
No, but he wanted...
Especially that way.
It was part of his fantasy was to be in that situation of control. So... But
yeah, some of the details I look forward to, because it would be nice to put it to rest. But I don't know if I would put it to rest, that your brain ponders it. How did they cross paths? How? I want answers. I want to know. 15 minutes? 4:04 to 4:17 or something? I'm not thinking anybody new will be introduced to the case in that way, like an accomplice or anything like that. You can't get somebody to get on that MO with you. No way. No way. Bonnie and Clyde, okay, that was a little different, but you're not getting, somebody's not getting on that crazy train with you. You're going to say, you're crazy. You are crazy.
Yeah, that would have come out by now, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mistrust between the two. And you're going to throw this person under the bus the first statement you say.
With you, you're going to say, you're crazy. You are crazy.
And a lot of people seem to think that this is the basic reaction that you would get. But we've seen time and time again that that's not true. And that people often don't say, hey, you're fucking crazy. Miss me with that shit. They say, oh, okay, well, how do we get it done? And they become co-defendants. It happens all the time. And I also find it odd that Bonnie and Clyde was brought up as reference there pertaining to multiple suspects. And also, what is this? Despite Bethany being the one that apparently indicated to police where Xana and Ethan were at that night, as well as obviously their return back to the house, police kept indicating that they needed more information about Xana and Ethan's whereabouts that night. They obviously wanted corroborating witnesses and information pertaining to the timeline. And that would seem to indicate possibly, it's not the most airtight witness, and it's not the most airtight account of exactly where they were at before returning to the residence and before ultimately losing their lives. It could also imply that they're missing some necessary details, and they wanted to clarify and supplement existing statements from BF. The last supplemental request for discovery and multiple exhibits and multiple pieces of information have been sealed from public viewing and endangering the life of an individual being referenced by defense and prosecuting attorneys alike over and over again in this case. I believe that's pertaining to vulnerable witnesses, informants, possible undercovers in the case, and that'll wrap up this Cops and Ops section of the video. The defense team for Bryan Kohberger pulls a sneak attack, an ex parte subpoena requesting to secure a witness from out of state. That would be the witness in Nevada, Bethany Funk, who they claim definitely had exculpatory evidence pertaining to Kohberger. Attorney for Bethany objects to this and inevitably states that it pissed her off that someone spelled Bethany's name wrong over and over again, but most importantly, that one, the affidavit in support of the motion for an out-of-state service is conclusory and lacks supportive detail regarding the materiality or exculpatory nature of Funk's testimony. In other words, she's claiming that defense attorneys didn't actually include enough details pertaining to what information they were referring to about that testimony, and the subpoena was obtained ex parte without notifying other parties and issued without a hearing, which didn't allow Bethany an opportunity to address concerns. And pertaining to the rules of Nevada, Bethany has a right to challenge that subpoena, but without the Nevada revised statute being properly followed, someone who is being asked for testimony in the state of Nevada doesn't have an opportunity to object and or review the testimony that is pertinent. And they also argue that this information shouldn't really come into the preliminary hearing as it's a pretrial phase of court, and that they should save that for the trial alone. So essentially they were saying that Bethany didn't need to come to the Idaho court and actually be present until the trial. Now later on, this is worked out of court, and Bethany's attorneys agreed to meet with Koberger's attorneys in order to provide that testimony. Of course, fast forward, and they would never get that chance because they put off a preliminary hearing for longer than I've ever seen in a criminal trial, and they allowed the prosecution a long time to massage out any knots in their case and really get their narrative together, jump forward for a grand jury indictment, a non-adversarial hearing, which is really usually not beneficial for the defendant. You'd much rather have a preliminary hearing, but here we practically see Anne hand the prosecuting attorneys the opportunity to do that. And now I guess we won't know about this testimony until trial, if we even hear about it then, due to the relevant and possible protective orders. You know, unfortunately, there's just so much that never is actually allowed into the trial, and there's really so much of the actual trial that the public won't get to see as well. Although everyone keeps saying, oh, we'll hear things at the trial, or that it's the gag order stopping a lot of the release of information, and it's simply not true. I mean, this court is, as Shannon Gray, victim's family attorney, who entered the case to argue the gag order, I'll quote him when he said, you know, they are sealing things and sealing hearings that are historically held openly and in front of the public. They're also holding certain hearings completely out of the court minutes, completely removed from the public even being able to realize that they're happening.
Is there anyone that you have a weird feeling about that the girls knew or that comes to mind?
Yeah, I would say not in the immediate circle by any means, but a few of the names that have been circulating around, I think it's hard not to kind of, you know, dig into this. And I don't know how much of that is just because we have so little information from law enforcement and how much of it really is, you know, a sister or a father's intuition.
Can you elaborate at all? I don't know. You don't have to give a name, but I mean, is it someone that she knew, or?
I have something to say about that. I just feel like there's been a couple individuals that were cleared very fast. That may not, maybe he should not have been. And yeah.
She had the strong alibi.
Just really fast.
If you can
like,
dismiss,
you know, an hour later, and we're like, what? And I don't know. I don't know anything about those individuals. I just know they were people that, you know, definitely should have been looked at, and yeah.
I don't know what would prevent you from sharing somebody's alibi.
Yeah, I think that's what we're struggling with. So it's like, you know, we know what we know. We've, you know, fought for Jack, Kaylee's boyfriend, and, you know, we still stand that way. So I did just kind of want to clear that up while we're talking through this ambiguity that, you know, that's not what we're honing in on here.
We don't want to make more victims out of innocent people.
Exactly.
We definitely don't want to do that.